From Vermont PBS, this is Democracy Now!
Under the Trump plan, we will have a massive tax cut for businesses and massive tax reform and simplification. As the president said during the campaign, we will lower the business rate to 15%.
The White House proposes massive tax cuts for the nation's millionaires and billionaires. Is this a form of tax reform or class warfare? We'll look at the winners and losers of Trump's tax plan, which was unveiled yesterday by two former executives of Goldman Sachs. Then here in Burlington, Vermont, we speak to Madeleine Kunin, Vermont's first and to date only female governor.
Women's issues like child care, equal pay for equal work, paid family and medical leave, those are gut issues for women because we've lived them. So the world still looks different through the eyes of a woman.
Plus, we go to Denver, Colorado, where ICE agents have detained a Mexican immigrant who once sought sanctuary in a local Unitarian church, but left after being told he was no longer a priority for deportation. But now the Trump administration says there are no priorities.
We come here, United States, to work, and the future for the family is we are not criminal.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The White House Wednesday outlined a tax plan that would add trillions of dollars to the U.S. deficit while overwhelmingly benefiting the wealthiest corporations and individuals, including President Trump. The skeletal plan, which the White House unveiled as a single-page document, would lower the corporate tax rate to 15%, though corporations rarely pay the current rate of 35%. Trump's plan would also end the estate tax, referred to by opponents as the death tax. This is White House economic advisor Gary Cohn.
We're going to repeal the death tax. The threat of being hit by the death tax leads small business owners and farmers in this country to waste countless hours and resources on complicated estate planning to make sure their children aren't hit with a huge tax when they die. No one wants to see their children have to sell the family business to pay an unfair tax.
IRS statistics show the estate tax is paid by just the wealthiest 0.2% of Americans. Trump's tax plan would also end the alternative minimum tax, a move that would benefit the richest Americans, including President Trump. A leaked 2005 tax return shows Donald Trump paid out $36 million in federal income taxes that year, most of it due to the alternative minimum tax. At the White House, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said the president would not make his tax returns public, even though Trump previously said he would release the returns after a routine audit.
My second question is, will the president release his tax returns so that
the president has no intention. The president has released plenty of information and I think has given more financial disclosure than anybody else. I think the American population has plenty of information on this topic.
President Trump's tax proposal would also decrease the number of income tax brackets from 7 to just 3, while lowering the tax rate for the wealthiest individuals by nearly 4 percentage points. The plan was blasted by congressional Democrats, including House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi of California, who called it a wish list for billionaires. We'll have more on Trump's tax plan after headlines with James Henry of the Tax Justice Network. The top U.S. commander for the Asia-Pacific region said Wednesday he could not rule out a nuclear first strike by North Korea, telling lawmakers the U.S. was prepared to launch a nuclear counterattack. Admiral Harry Harris was speaking to the House Armed Services Committee.
With every test, Kim Jong-un moves closer to his stated goal of a preemptive nuclear strike capability against American cities, and he's not afraid to fail in public. Defending our homeland is my top priority, so I must assume that the Kim Jong-un's nuclear claims are true.
Admiral Harris's remarks came as President Trump summoned nearly every U.S. senator to the White House, grounds for an unusual hour-long classified briefing on North Korea. Here from Vermont, Bernie Sanders refused to go to the White House. Meanwhile, U.S. troops began installing a missile defense system known as THAAD in South Korea. The deployment drew protests from hundreds of villagers in Songju, South Korea, who clashed with police as troops began deploying THAAD hardware on a local golf course. This is protest leader Lee Seok-ju.
THAAD라는 거는 전쟁 무기이기 때문에 결국은
THAAD is a weapon and can only trigger wars. Negotiation between South Korea and the North is the only way to ease tensions, maintain peace, not by deploying THAAD missiles.
The deployment of THAAD is also opposed by Chinese officials who say the missile system actually aims to counter China's military power in the region, not to contain North Korea. In Washington, D.C., the chair of the Federal Communications Commission Wednesday outlined a sweeping plan to dismantle net neutrality rules, which seek to keep the Internet open and prevent corporate service providers from blocking access to websites, slowing down content, or providing paid fast lanes for Internet service. FCC Chair Ajit Pai unveiled the plan at a forum hosted by FreedomWorks, a right-wing group backed by the billionaire Koch brothers. The plan would end a rule classifying the Internet as a public utility, leaving industry to largely police itself. Evan Greer of the digital rights group Fight for the Future said, quote, "Internet users will fight tooth and nail to defend our basic right to connect, create, learn, and share." The White House says President Donald Trump told the leaders of Canada and Mexico Wednesday the U.S. will remain part of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, while the president seeks to renegotiate the deal. The reported phone calls with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and President Enrique Peña Nieto came just hours after administration officials said the president was preparing to begin withdrawing the U.S. from NAFTA. On the campaign trail, Trump called NAFTA the single worst trade deal ever approved in this country. Meanwhile, President Trump ordered a review of national monuments, potentially opening up millions of acres of public lands to drilling, mining, and logging. Trump said Wednesday his executive order is aimed at reversing President Obama's use of the 1906 Antiquities Act to protect federal land from deployment.
The Antiquities Act does not give the federal government unlimited power to lock up millions of acres of land and water, and it's time we ended this abusive practice.
Conservationists blasted the Trump administration's unprecedented move to scale back national monuments and promised legal challenges. Randy Spivak of the Center for Biological Diversity said, quote, "Their goal is to hand our public lands over to corporations to mine, frack, bulldoze, and clear-cut till there's nothing left to dig up," unquote. In Denver, Colorado, U.S. immigration agents arrested Arturo Hernandez Garcia Wednesday morning, nearly 2 years after authorities said he was no longer a target for deportation. In a statement to the Denver Post, ICE spokesman Carl Rusnak said, quote, "Hernandez Garcia has overstayed his original 6-month visa by nearly 14 years. He's exhausted his petitions through the immigration courts and through ICE." Garcia's supporters believe there are political motivations behind his arrest, including his immigration activism. Jennifer Piper of the American Friends Service Committee said, quote, "Nothing has changed in his case other than Trump is president now," unquote. Garcia sought refuge inside Denver's First Unitarian Society Church in 2014, where he stayed for 9 months as he fought to remain in the U.S. with his wife and 2 children. After headlines, we'll go to Denver to speak with Jen Piper about Hernandez Garcia's case and the Trump administration's crackdown on undocumented immigrants. In Turkey, police carried out a wave of arrests at dawn Wednesday, rounding up over 1,000 people accused of supporting dissident cleric Fethullah Gulen, who is accused by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of plotting last year's failed coup attempt. Turkish authorities said they issued more than 4,600 arrest warrants and suspended more than 9,000 police officers accused of backing Gulen, who lives in the Poconos in Pennsylvania. President Erdogan has repeatedly demanded the U.S. extradite Gulen. Nearly 50,000 people have been arrested under emergency rules since Turkey's military failed and attempted to oust Erdogan last July. Venezuela's government said Wednesday it'll withdraw from the Organization of American States, accusing the Washington, D.C.-based body of backing violent protests seeking to oust socialist President Nicolas Maduro. This is Miguel Angel Trinidad, Venezuela's ambassador to the OAS.
The Venezuelan people have the right to resolve their internal problems without the guardianship of any of those who are here, of anybody. Much less will Venezuela's destiny ever be decided from Washington. The Venezuelan people fought very hard 200 years ago so that we could decide our own matters in Venezuela. And all Venezuelans of all colors are proud of our people and of our freedom.
This move to withdraw from the OAS came as opposition parties continued to lead mass street protests across Venezuela. On Wednesday, 3 more demonstrators were killed in clashes with police, including a 20-year-old student who died after he was shot with a tear gas canister. At the United Nations, Saudi Arabia will begin a 4-year term in 2018 on the UN Commission on the Status of Women following a secret ballot election this week. The move drew swift condemnation from critics, including Hilal Noor, the executive director of UN Watch, who said, quote, electing Saudi Arabia to protect women's rights is like making an arsonist into the town fire chief, unquote. Saudi women are required to be accompanied at all times by male guardians who make decisions on marriage, travel, employment, and health care. Saudi women are barred from holding many jobs and are prohibited from driving cars. In the United States and Nevada, police arrested 7 people Wednesday at a nonviolent protest against U.S. drone warfare at the gates of the Creech Air Force Base northwest of Las Vegas. The base is home to drone operators who pilot deadly Reaper and Predator drones in missions throughout the Middle East and Afghanistan. The protesters temporarily shut down a stretch of Highway 95 near the base, holding banners honoring the victims of U.S. drone attacks. Ahead of the protests, Veterans for Peace launched a series of commercials in Las Vegas urging drone operators to abandon their missions.
U.S. drones have murdered thousands, including women and children. Drone pilots, please refuse to fly.
And the Academy Award-winning director, Jonathan Demme, has died. Demme was best known for The Silence of the Lambs, as well as the Oscar-winning film Philadelphia, the first major Hollywood film to take on the AIDS epidemic. Demme directed 2 documentaries on Haiti, The Agronomist and Haiti Dreams of Democracy. His 2011 film, I'm Carolyn Parker, documented efforts to rebuild New Orleans' Lower Ninth Ward in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. Jonathan Demme died Wednesday at his home in New York at the age of 73. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from Vermont PBS. The White House has outlined a plan to give the nation's millionaires and billionaires a massive tax break while adding trillions of dollars to the U.S. deficit. The plan would lower the corporate tax rate to 15%, end the estate tax, and end the alternative minimum tax, a move that would solely benefit the richest Americans, including President Trump. A leaked 2005 tax return shows Trump paid out $36.6 million in federal income taxes that year, most of it due to the alternative minimum tax. Former Labor Secretary Robert Reich described Trump's tax plan as a form of class warfare. The tax plan was unveiled Wednesday by 2 former executives at Goldman Sachs, Trump's chief economic advisor, Gary Cohn, and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, who hailed the tax cuts.
Under the Trump plan, we will have a massive tax cut for businesses and massive tax reform and simplification. As the president said during the campaign, we will lower the business rate to 15%. We will make it a territorial system. We will have a one-time tax on overseas profits, which will bring back trillions of dollars that are offshore to be invested here in the United States to purchase capital and to create jobs. The president is determined to unleash economic growth for businesses. This is not just about large corporations. Small and medium-sized businesses will be eligible for the business rate as
well.
To
talk more about Trump's tax plan, we're joined by the economist James Henry of the Tax Justice Network. Well, let's start off, James, if you could just lay out your reaction to the tax plan as it's been unveiled.
Well, this is nothing less than the largest wealth transfer that has ever occurred if it were passed. I doubt that it will pass. But it amounts to a tax heist by the ruling class, by Trump, and the richest administration we have ever had. It would not only effectively gut the progressive corporate income tax and initiate a race to the bottom among all countries that have corporate taxation around the world, because they would be competing with each other. It would also effectively gut the estate tax, eliminate that, so we're basically heading toward a kind of oligarchy, and it would reduce the top rate for personal income tax to from 39.6% to 35%, so it's an immediate paycheck. This is also going to blow up the federal deficit by an estimated $3 to $7 trillion over the next 10 years. So that's going to not make deficit hawks happy. And I know, the Republicans have time and again insisted on budget balances in this under the Obama administration. The Congress was deadlocked many times. Well, this just throws that completely out the window. It's, I think, especially interesting to see what's going on with the corporate income tax, because basically most of the benefits of this tax plan will actually go to the Googles and Microsofts and Apples of the world, which have now going to get a enormous tax break on the $2 trillion of offshore assets that they have accumulated, many times using bogus schemes like transferring intellectual property to places like Ireland. Now they're going to be able to bring all that back and only pay at most 8% on it. We tried that in 2004. We saw Bush do something similar. It did not create jobs. Multinationals took the money back. They used it to do shareholder buybacks that enriched their senior executives. But in this case, we're going beyond that. On the margin, they're going to have a global territorial tax. So U.S. companies like General Electric that realize more than 60% of their income from offshore are no longer going to have to pay any tax on that at all. And, whereas domestic companies, are going to be stuck with a 15% rate. This is going to be a tremendous boon to Trump's own personal pocket, because the only reason he paid any taxes at all, we only have one tax year for him. That was from 2005. The only reason he paid any tax that year was really because of what's called the alternative minimum tax, and he's abolishing that under this plan. And all of his rich friends are actually also subject to that same alternative minimum tax. So the list goes on, but basically this amounts to transferring the costs of essential services of government, the federal government, to middle class and the poor that are not going to be able to benefit this. They're going to be paying the debts that this plan will increase, and they're going to also be watching as other countries around the world engage in this tax competition war that Trump has just initiated.
James Henry, I wanted to turn to the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist David K. Johnston, who obtained the first 2 pages of Trump's 2005 tax returns. He appeared on Democracy Now! And talked about what they...
Donald Trump, in writing, in his campaign documents, has said we're going to get rid of the alternative minimum tax. Well, of the $36.6 million in tax that he paid, more than $31 million was because of the alternative minimum tax. And the reason for that is that $103 million that was disallowed under the alternative minimum tax, it's allowed under the regular tax, disallowed under the alternative. Even with it being disallowed, Donald Trump, though, got a 20% discount on his taxes, and here's why. At that level of income in 2005, your tax rate is 35% of your income. But if you're on the alternative minimum tax, your tax rate's only 28%. That's 20% less. So he was only paying 80 cents on the dollar to begin with.
So that's the journalist David K. Johnston. In the New York Magazine, the headline is "Trump Proposes Giant Unfunded Tax Cut for Himself." James Henry, elaborate on this.
Well, I mean, that alternative minimum tax, as we just said, is one of the key elements of this. But I would also emphasize many other provisions here. The drop of the top rate to 35% for personal income taxpayers at the same time that they're cutting the corporate rate to 15% is going to create this enormous incentive for rich people to park all their income in companies. And then, you know, they won't pay any tax on it until it's distributed. So that's just another, and they've also eliminated the pass-through tax where income goes from corporate to personal use. So there are a lot of games that are going to be played by the very wealthy, but 90% of the benefits of this plan go to the top 1% of the population. That's the clear. The shareholders of major companies, most of which are multinationals that are going to be actually given an incentive to offshore their businesses by this. This is actually going to increase the use of offshore havens by companies like Apple and Google because there's now a territorial tax. So, you know, on the whole, I want
to turn to candidate Donald Trump speaking last year on the Today Show about taxes.
A year ago, candidate Trump told Today he'd ask the wealthy to pay more.
Do you believe in raising taxes on the wealthy?
I do, including myself. I do.
James Henry.
The president doesn't keep his word on this or many other issues. I think his supporters should really be distressed about the fact that going forward, they're going to live in a country that is essentially much more unequal, where the costs of government are basically on their backs. We've tried this experiment before. We've had 30, 40 years of Arthur Laffer type tax cuts where they were supposed to pay for themselves. They never have. At most, this will pay for maybe one, add a 0.2% of growth to the economy, but overall tax revenue will drop by up to $7 trillion over this next decade. And so we're going to be saddled with increased debt, multinational companies that are now citizens of nowhere for tax purposes, and a much more unequal society.
So what happens now? I mean, you have a $3 trillion deficit that this was caused. We're talking about a Republican-controlled House and Senate who are supposedly deficit hawks. You said you don't think this will pass, but how do you see this playing out, and where can people weigh in?
Well, I think there are, a substantial number of Democrats who oppose this just on principle and because of the track record we've had that this is going to cause huge deficits. This is really going to be a litmus test for the Republicans. They're going to be put to a choice here. They are supposed to be interested in fighting deficits, but here we have, I think ultimately this was what the election was all about. This is a land grab, essentially, by the ruling elites in this country. And I think, the Republicans who said all along they were deficit hawks are really going to be flushed out here. It may produce some of the same divisions we saw on the Obamacare matter, but ultimately I'm pessimistic. I mean, I think put to the test, many Republicans will just give up on their anti-debt principles.
Well, James Henry, I want to thank you for being with us. This is something we will continue to talk about. Tomorrow we'll be joined by Congressmember Welch, one of the members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, also the single Congressmember representing Vermont. James Henry, economist, lawyer, senior advisor with the Tax Justice Network, former chief economist at McKinsey & Company. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we turn to Vermont's only woman governor to get a comment on this 100 days of the Trump administration. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back with Governor Cunin in a moment.
Never top of the pile. Enjoy the view, stay for a while. Hard to get by on your own, you're never alone. Life of regret. Oh, each drink and each cigarette leads to the life of regret. So go out and make your amends. Plant you a garden and get you some friends. Trouble still just what you get in this life of regret.
Nobody's Fool by Alejandro Rose Garcia. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from Vermont PBS. This is Democracy Now! As Donald Trump approaches his 100th day as president Saturday, his approval ratings are the lowest any president has had at this stage in generations. A recent poll by NBC News and the Wall Street Journal found just 40% of Americans currently approve of his job performance. Trump took to Twitter to call the poll totally wrong. Well, we're joined now by a pioneering Vermont politician, former Vermont Governor Madeleine Kunin. In 1997, she became just the fourth woman in U.S. history to be elected governor whose husband had not previously served. Kunin was born in Switzerland in 1933, came to the U.S. as a child. She later served as U.S. ambassador to Switzerland. In recent months, she's been a vocal critic of President Trump. She recently participated in the Tax Day March in Burlington, Vermont, and also wrote a piece thanking Trump for, quote, waking us from our slumber. In the article, Kunin writes, quote, we're becoming a nation of activists. The election of Donald Trump has inspired us to get off the couch and do something. This is a vibrant, sometimes angry, but fundamentally healthy exercise. It's the lifeblood of democracy. Governor Kunin, it's great to have you back on Democracy Now!
Thank you, Amy. I'm delighted to be here.
So, it's just about 100 days of the Donald Trump presidency. Your assessment?
Well, some of what he's been doing was expected because we got a lot of clues during the campaign. But it turns out to be worse than we anticipated because he's going full speed ahead. I mean, everything from yesterday's announcement that he will review 40 monuments, which is national land, public land, to this latest tax proposal, to his stand on immigration, to just gutting the Environmental Protection Agency. So you don't know what to get angry about first because you're being bombarded right and left by things that many Americans vehemently disagree with.
So you wrote an open commentary thanking Donald Trump for waking us from our slumber, particularly referring to women. What do you mean?
I mean, things are really happening all over the country. And here in Vermont, for example, we had a huge women's march in Montpelier. But from my personal experience, I spoke to a class the other day at the University of Vermont, and I asked, how many of you consider yourself feminists? And almost every hand went up. And previously, before Trump's inauguration, when I would ask that question, you know, one or two would tentatively raise their hands, and there was a big discussion about why we're not feminists. So whether you're a feminist or not, people are marching who never marched before. People are following the news closely. You can't have a conversation without Trump invading it at some point. It's like he's like an endangered, like a occupying army almost, that he's just on everybody's mind. We can't help it. Even if we'd like to get away, we can't.
I wanted to ask you about women's representation around the country in legislatures and top elected offices. The New York Times had a piece recently, What Happens When Women Legislate? And it's talking about the group Emerge. You started Emerge Vermont. It says at 39.7%, Nevada now ranks near the top for women's representation in state politics, second only to Vermont.
Right.
So how has it happened here? And where do you see the glass ceiling is?
Well, not only are we second in the nation in the percentage of women in our legislature.
Well, this says top. This says Nevada's second.
Well, it's a question of decimal points. And once we can forget about the decimal points, we won't argue who's first or second or third. But I thought Colorado was first, but it may have changed in the meantime. But the women are chairs of key committees. Both appropriations committees are chaired by women. Our speaker is a woman. And it has an impact because different issues come up, as that article said. We're debating a law that would protect pregnant women from arduous tasks in the workplace, paid family leave. So these issues come up, but also I think women sometimes have a different way of negotiating. There's not as much macho, I win, you lose. We sit down together.
And what about progressive politicians and Republican politicians as women in the United States?
Well, the Republican women have a big hurdle to get over because they won't be accepted by the party if they are pro-choice, if they believe in legal and safe abortion. So that cuts out a lot of people. But progressive women certainly should be on board. I mean, what we're seeing is that we don't want to be observers of the process anymore. We want to sit at the table where the decisions are made, and it's so important for women to be there, and for women who don't want to run for office to support these women in every way, from financial contributions to bringing a casserole for dinner when a woman is running for office because she can't get home in time to cook.
I wanted to ask you about perhaps the most prominent woman in the Trump administration, his daughter, Ivanka. Well, just in the last week in Berlin, Germany, President Trump's daughter, White House advisor Ivanka Trump, was booed during a panel discussion at a meeting of women business leaders when she claimed that her father, Donald Trump, is a champion of families.
I'm very, very proud of my father's advocacy. Long before he came to the presidency, but during the campaign, including in the primaries, he's been a tremendous champion of supporting families and enabling them to thrive in the new reality of you hear the reaction from the audience.
So that was the panel moderator. Of this event in Berlin, Germany. And that was Ivanka Trump herself talking about her father as the champion of women in the workplace.
Well, there's scant evidence of that from everything we've seen. I mean, he has the fewest number of women in his cabinet. I don't know the exact percentage, but the photo op you usually see is a group of men sitting at the table, a famous photo of the Tea Party meeting when there wasn't a woman in sight. His attitude on abortion is taking away the rights of women to make their own health care decisions. That's crucial. And we'll see if the child care, her one starring moment was when she spoke up for child care and for paid maternity leave. But we'll see if that happens and how hard she pushes. But also all her conflicts of interest with her own business dealings. So she's in a very suspect position as far as ethics goes and conflicts of interest.
You're one of only 38 women in U.S. history to have served as governor. You're among the first women to be elected in her own right, and you remain the only female governor Vermont has ever elected. Can you tell us a little about your own story, how you came to run for governor, where you came from.
Well, I was born in Zurich, Switzerland, and I came to this country at the outbreak of World War II with my mother and brother. But what my mother instilled in us is still the story of the American dream. And I think that gave me a more optimistic view of politics. But I didn't really get interested in running for anything until the women's movement. And I started out in the legislature and lieutenant governor, so I worked my way up the ladder. And I guess I felt that I could make a difference. And I got my education as chair of the House Appropriations Committee. And if you know where the money is, then you can really have an impact. And I feel very privileged that...
Now, when you say House Appropriations Committee, you mean in the State House, right?
Yes,
because
sorry.
Vermont has never sent a woman to Washington.
Yes, I should clarify that, which is our only black mark. But we have one lone congressman, as you know. But still, that's not a good enough excuse. But part of what Emerge is aiming at is to elect more women, and eventually, we hope soon, we'll send a woman to Congress and lose that unpleasant distinction.
You were born in Switzerland. You were the first Jewish woman governor in any state in the United States to be elected. And you also became the U.S. ambassador to Switzerland. And this was at a controversial time, yes, when, right, Switzerland's complicity in its banking system with the Nazis was being exposed. I wanted first to get your reaction to the White House press secretary, Sean Spicer, sparking outrage after comparing Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to Hitler and falsely claiming Hitler never used chemical weapons. This is Spicer speaking on the first day of the Jewish holiday Passover 2 weeks ago.
You look, we didn't use chemical weapons in World War II. You know, you had someone as despicable as Hitler who didn't even sink to using chemical weapons. So you have to, if you're Russia, ask yourself, is this a country that you and a regime that you want to align yourself with?
So, in fact, the Nazis systematically used poison gas as part of its genocide of 6 million Jews and others. The Nazis began experimenting with gas with the specific purpose of carrying out mass murder in the late 30s. After the Nazis invaded Soviet Union, they deployed gas vans to kill hundreds of thousands of people. By 1942, the Nazis had set up a series of concentration camps where gas chambers were the main method of killing people. At its peak, as many as 6,000 people, mostly Jews, were gassed to death every day at the Auschwitz concentration camp alone. During his comments, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer also refused to Nazi concentration camps as Holocaust centers. So, Governor Kunin, your thoughts?
I think he must have flunked history, because he's so totally naive and unaware of what actually happened. And I think some of that is typical of the Trump administration. People don't believe in research, they don't believe in expertise, and they go by the seat of their pants on a lot of issues which require expertise. You know, we're sort of in a huge anti-elite universe. In the State Department, for example, there are no people who have a sense of history and a sense of diplomacy and the skill that is needed to be an effective diplomat and serve our country. So I think it was a very important misstatement. You can't call it a lie, because he thought he was speaking the truth when we all know that was fiction.
You also served as Deputy Secretary of Education under President Clinton. Education's very important to you. I'm wondering your thoughts on the current Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos.
Well, her orientation is entirely different from the mission of the Department of Education, which is to support the public school system. And her interest in private education and religious schools is very disturbing, because public education is always starved for funding. And student financial aid. I was very much involved with that when I was Deputy Secretary. And we have to find the right way to reduce the huge debt that so many students are left with. And again, she's moving in the opposite direction by going to private lenders instead of the public with something called direct lending. So I'm concerned. And, you know, her ignorance about the children with disabilities, again, we have to invest in the right places. And they even talk about, which is not a new story, eliminating the Department of Education. She hasn't said that, but the Trump people have referred to that.
Does Vermont have any charter schools?
We don't have, we have sort of semi-charter schools, but not officially as charter schools. Like in Burlington, there's schools that emphasize the arts and that specialize and draw children into those schools, but I don't think we have officially a charter school.
You have called for 16-year-olds to be able to vote. Explain.
Well, I think it would galvanize this group and maybe make education while they're in high school. What we really have to get back to is the old-fashioned term civics, where you learned how the government worked, and now we can teach it in a much more exciting way. But young people, as you know, are the least likely to vote, and people my age are the most likely to vote. And I think, again, the Trump administration is igniting hope again for young people and fear. So kind of hope and fear may make them want to vote and be good citizens.
I wanted to ask you about what's happened at Fox. Another Fox News anchor, Sean Hannity, is facing accusations of unwanted sexual advances. Former Fox News guest Debbie Schlussel has accused Hannity of inviting her back to his hotel room, and that after she rejected his advances, quote, he called me and yelled at me, and I kind of knew I wouldn't be back on his show, unquote. While Schlussel says she doesn't think the incident qualifies as sexual harassment, she says that she thought Hannity was weird and creepy. The accusations come after Fox's top anchor, Bill O'Reilly, was ousted amidst revelations he and Fox paid more than $13 million to settle 5 sexual harassment claims. O'Reilly will reportedly receive a payout of about $25 million, equivalent to 1 year's salary, after he was fired. O'Reilly's payout follows a $40 million severance package paid to former Fox News CEO Roger Ailes last year after he was accused of sexual harassment by more than 20 women. Governor Kunin, you recently did a commentary for VPR, Vermont Public Radio, on O'Reilly.
Well, the good news is that women are speaking out. Women are no longer staying silent as we were told to do. You know, if you want to get ahead, don't say anything. Just keep your mouth shut. And these brave women at Fox News took the risk, and it still is risky, to speak out and file their suits and be recognized. And the good news is they had a huge impact. That you know, the biggest man in news, iconic Bill O'Reilly, was toppled from his pedestal, and that sent shockwaves. But it also sent a huge message that we're not going to tolerate this anymore. If you misbehave in a sexual way and make women uncomfortable or humiliate them, you're out. And I think that gives other women around the country a huge sense of power. And in a way, it comes down to money, because the advertisers, 50 advertisers withdrew, and that's where the action is. And suddenly, you know, the lights went on and at Fox News, and Rupert Murdoch had to say, hey, we got to get rid of this guy.
So let me ask you about your own history. You were the first governor in the country to march in a gay pride march. Your daughter came out to you decades ago. Can you describe that experience and how people responded to you? You marched in Burlington.
Well, it was early in the gay rights movement, and it was when these parades were very lively and sort of weird and sort of funny. And I gave a talk at the beginning of the parade. But later, I wondered, after that gay rights parade, I went to a military ceremony in the next town, and I thought, what a contrast, you know. Of course, then it was more dramatic contrast than it would be now. But I found out later that at a cash register in a small town in Vermont, they had my picture from the paper, and they had a circle with a slash through it. So the feeling was much more conflicted 30 years ago. I hate to count it up, but I think that's how long ago it was.
Finally, in your years as governor, and now, you're an extremely active post-governor, more so than most anyone in the country, in stating your views, being out there. You started Emerge Vermont. It's part of a national organization. Talk about what you feel women need to do to get elected at every level of government and what's holding women back. The numbers are so low in the United States.
Well, when women run, they have an equal chance of winning as a man, except when it comes to the presidency. We won't go into that now, but there's still a huge barrier at that level. But for legislative seats, it's a little harder for governor, but not impossible. I think what they need to do is really stand firm in their beliefs. I mean, you have to have the inner passion. You have to have the motivation. And then you can follow the rules of what it takes to be elected. And I think the biggest thing that women lack is confidence. You know, there's no degree in running for office, and I think we're so used to being certified for this, that, or the other thing, or getting an A in a course, and then we feel good. But there is simply a process that can be managed, and I think women are deterred by money, by the funding, by the negativity of politics. It was better in my day, no doubt. But women have to be at the table to make the decisions or be part of the decisions that affect their lives and their families' lives. So they also have to realize it's exciting. And when I say it's exciting, it's also fun, which we don't talk about much, but it's very rewarding. If you live your life making a difference in the world for others, you really live a good life.
Governor Kunin, I want to thank you very much for joining us. Madeleine May Kunin served as governor of Vermont for 3 terms from 1985 to 1991. She's Marsh Professor at the University of Vermont and the author of The New Feminist Agenda, Defining the Next Revolution for Women, Work, and Family. She is also the founder of Emerge Vermont. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we're going to Denver, Colorado, where a Mexican immigrant has just been taken by ICE agents off the streets where he was working and readied for deportation. But people are coming out and speaking out. Stay with us.
No matter what all comes my way, I will not be afraid. No matter what word slanders my name, I will not be afraid. So long as I got that heart beating, so long as I got that soul of feeling, so long as I got that spirit in me, I will not be afraid. No, I will not be afraid. No, I will not be afraid. Say well all you want to be, I will not be afraid. Drop me both my 2 teeth, I will not be afraid. Take all of my money from me, I will not be afraid. As long as I got that heart beating, so long as I got that soul feeling, so long as I got that spirit in me, I will not
will not be afraid by Caroline Rose here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. We go now to Denver, Colorado, where Mexican immigrant Arturo Hernandez was arrested Wednesday morning by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Hernandez Garcia has sought sanctuary from deportation at the First Unitarian Society Church for 9 months until July 2015. When he was handed a letter and told he was no longer a priority for deportation. In a statement now, ICE spokesman Carl Rusnock said, quote, Hernandez Garcia has overstayed his original 6-month visa by nearly 14 years. He's exhausted his petitions through the immigration courts and through ICE. Well, supporters of Hernandez Garcia say he's been targeted in part because of his immigration activism. A group of about 24 people gathered outside an ICE office in Centennial on Wednesday afternoon to protest his arrest. Meanwhile, last week, an immigrants' rights activist who sought refuge in the same Denver church was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people for 2017. Jeanette Vizquera came to the U.S. from Mexico in 1997, one of the founders of the Metro Denver Sanctuary Coalition, who's helped undocumented immigrants seek sanctuary. Earlier this year, she skipped a scheduled check-in with ICE officials and instead sought refuge in the First Unitarian Society Church, and she has 4 children. 3 of Vizquera's children are U.S.-born. She made the decision to seek refuge in the church out of fear she'd be deported under the Trump administration. So she couldn't go to the big Time gala for the 100 most influential people. But they had a gala at the church. She couldn't step outside, afraid of being arrested by ICE Tuesday night. It was Wednesday morning that the man who took refuge at that same church just 2 years ago was taken by ICE agents. To talk more about the situation of undocumented immigrants under the Trump administration, we go to Denver to speak with Jennifer Piper, an interfaith organizer with American Friends Service Committee Denver. She coordinates the Metro Denver Sanctuary Coalition along with Jeanette Vizquera. Thank you so much, Jen, for joining us. Can you explain what happened to Arturo? We visited him when he took refuge in the church. Explain what's happened now. Why was he taken off the street?
Good morning. Absolutely nothing has changed in Arturo's case. He's been in the U.S. for more than 17 years. He has 2 kids. He has a 17-year-old and an 11-year-old daughter. He still has no criminal record. He is still a father. He's still a small business owner, and he went to work when he went to the company warehouse to pick up tile. As he was leaving, Immigration and Customs Enforcement was waiting for him, detained him, took him to the ICE office in Centennial, where we tried to block his exit for several hours. But we believe he is now likely in the GEO for-profit detention center in Aurora.
Now, explain, what did ICE tell you? Did you call them? Was he actually given a letter by the Department of Homeland Security back in 2015 when he decided to leave the church and dare to step outside again?
Yes. We met with high-level Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials after 3 days of fasting in front of their office in July of 2015. And after that meeting, we received a letter stating that Immigration and Customs Enforcement was using their discretion not to implement his final order of deportation. Arturo believed that this was a gesture of good faith, that the people we were talking with in that meeting were honest, and that they would continue to fulfill their commitment to him. And so in wanting to respond to that good faith, he left Sanctuary and went back to his everyday life, continued to organize, continued to work with his community, to build people up, to bring people together. He's always someone who will bring a smile to your face. He's constantly caring for other people around him, and is really a very gentle, firm, smart person who's a leader in our community.
So what did ICE tell you? Jennifer, what did ICE tell you about why they picked him up yesterday?
So Arturo does have a final order of deportation. That's why he entered the congregation in October of 2014. Everyone who enters sanctuary has a final order of deportation, and in his case, we felt that they had not used their discretion. And so when I spoke with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they said he had a final order, and that there are no longer any priorities under the Trump administration for enforcement. And when you look at Trump's executive orders, that's true. Every person who's removable from the U.S. is a priority for his administration, regardless of their criminal history or not, regardless of how long they've been in the U.S., regardless of their ties to this country.
I want to go back to 2015 when I went to the First Unitarian Society Church in Denver to meet Arturo Hernandez Garcia.
I am a good person. I'm working hard here by 16 years in Colorado. I never been in trouble. I never be arrested. I never stay in jail before here in Mexico. And
you had your two children here in the United States?
I have one daughter that is 15 years old. She's born in Mexico, and she's in DACA, the Deferred Action for students. She's now get a permit job for her, and I have Andreas, 9 years old. It's a citizen.
So what has it been like for you? You've been here for many months now, for November, December, for 4 months.
Yeah, 3 months and a half already. It's hard for me and for my family to. I want to come back to my life, normal life, and come back to work and still in home with my daughters, my wife.
We're standing in the sanctuary, and behind you is a banner that says, "All souls are sacred and worthy. There is unity that makes us one," and we're standing in front of the organ.
We come in here, United States, to work in the future for the families. We are not criminal. It's not true with the people the government say, some TV. So I come in here to, yeah, like I say, just to work in the very future for my kids, and I contributing for the state. We working, pay taxes, and it's all. Everything I do for my family. So,
Jennifer Piper, that is Arturo Hernandez Garcia 2 years ago when I saw him in the church before he decided to leave with his paper from the U.S. government saying he was not a priority for deportation. What will happen now? Several dozen of you gathered in Centennial, a suburb of Denver, to demand his release. What is the process now? We have 20 seconds.
Yeah, we'll continue to fight for his release, and we'll continue to push back on President Trump's policies. We know that the courts have just found again that his immigration policies are unjust, and we call on people to visit their congressperson today and to push back on the immoral budget that is being proposed tomorrow, to say no to $4.5 billion more for border and interior enforcement. Congress is responsible for this mess. Congress needs to stand up, including Democrats, and say this budget is cruel and it's immoral, and we need to visit our congresspeople's offices today because the vote is tomorrow.
Jennifer Piper, thanks so much for being with us, with the Interfaith organizer with American Friends Service Committee. That does it for our broadcast. We continue our multi-city tour. Today at noon, I'll be speaking at Bennington College, and then tonight at Unitarian Church on Pearl Street in Burlington, Vermont. On Saturday, Democracy Now! Will broadcast for 5 hours from the People's Climate March in Washington, D.C. from 10 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Saturday night, I'll be speaking at Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ, and on Sunday at Busboys and Poets at 5. Then it's on to Durham, North Carolina Monday, Miami Tuesday, Tampa Wednesday, Atlanta Thursday, Minneapolis, and Carlton, Minnesota on Friday. Check our website for details. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.